apologies, I've gone 1 minute over. I've been watching the clock on this thing. To begin with, welcome to the Audit and Standards Committee. And if you've got any mobile phones or anything else that you may disturb the meeting, may you switch them off. The meeting is a public meeting, has been live streamed for the public to view. I believe there is no fire test today, and if there is one, we run towards Tudor Square. And welcome to the people who might be watching us remotely. I've actually remembered all this off by heart without reading it for a change, but it's too late now. It's the last one, isn't it, before we might have a bit of a change around. My name is Mohammed Maroof. I'm the Chair of Audit and Standards, and we'll just get everybody to introduce themselves. Alison.
Alison Howard, Independent Co-opted Member.
James Brackley, Independent Co-opted Member.
Laura McLean, Councillor for Walkley Ward.
Fran Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Henry Nottage, Councillor for Hillsborough Ward.
The officers.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Afternoon everyone, Claire Taylor, Chief Operating Officer.
Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting.
Linda Hunter, Senior Finance Manager, Internal Audit and Risk Management.
Ruth Matheson, Finance Manager for Finance and Commercial Services.
Hi, Sharrett, Senior Finance Manager, Finance and Commercial Services.
Jay Bell, Democratic Service Officer.
Thank you very much for that. Apologies for absence, Councillor Lewis Chin-Chen and also Councillor Simon Clement-Jones. Not had any other further apologies. Exclusions of the public and press. I don't think we've got any here, have we? No. Members' declarations of interest. Any member want to declare an interest? Silence, I take, means no, so that's fine. Minutes of the previous meeting, I'll go through page by page, just shout up if there is anything there. Page 9, page 10, page 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and finally 18. All fine? No issues? We'll accept those as the minutes. Right, moving straight on to the agenda, item number 7. And the presentation is from Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this it's just to introduce you to the report on compliance to international auditing standards. So in summary, the report draws together all the work and presentations that this committee's had over the last 12 months. So there's nothing new in this report, it's just actually summarising the items that you've seen already in the past 12 months. And the key areas I want to just highlight to you are the 6 main areas are annual accounts, system of internal control, governance arrangements, counterfraud arrangements, risk management and standards issues. So like I say, so over the 12 months, you've had adequate oversight so you can actually demonstrate that your compliance to the international auditing standards from the breadth and depth of the reports you've had in those 6 key areas. And then also, I'll just mention on paragraph 16, it does outline there the training and development areas that you've received as well for the remit, for the role of the Audit Committee. So really, it's just a summary of everything you've had. Nothing's new in there. It just highlights the work that you've had over the last 12 months. So the recommendations that I'm asking for is firstly, if you can confirm that it adequately reflects the reports that you've received over the 12 months. And then secondly, is to make sure that you're happy as well that you've had enough presentations to fulfil that role to say that you've actually compliant with the international auditing standards. So, but say everything in there, I have gone through the minutes in the last 12 months and picked out everything that's been presented. So it should be a full and comprehensive list. And I did double check it.
Thank you so much, Linda. Any questions? I'll open it up to questions. No questions? That was easy. So we just go for the recommendation, which is members are asked to confirm that the report gives an accurate reflection of the reports they have received and considered throughout the year. And members are also asked to confirm that they have now have an overview of the council's systems of internal control, so they are assured that they are fulfilling the requirements of those charged. All agreed? Thank you so much. Right, that was quick. Thank you, Linda. On to item 8 and the presenting officers are Ruth and Claire. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is just to update you today on the 22-23 Statement of Accounts and ask members to note the accounting and disclosure adjustments that we've made. So the accounts were originally approved by the Section 151 officer at the time on the 31st of May last year, and were then noted by committee at the 22nd of June meeting last year. Although the accounts have not been subject to external audit by Ernst & Young, whilst they remain open, officers do continue to review and make sure that the accounts are accurate. We identified a number of adjustments that we wanted to make to ensure they remain accurate. The adjustments made have been reauthorised by the new Section 151 officer on the 16th of April and have been republished on the Council's website. In your agenda pack, there is a link on page 29 of your report that takes you to the full set of adjusted accounts. So to summarise the adjustments we've made since the previous version that you've seen, the first adjustment was to council dwellings valuations, which was just amended for the latest housing price index. And whilst we were making adjustments to the valuations, we made a couple of adjustments to PP and heritage assets just to make sure that they were still valid. The second area was the pension triannual valuation, and although so the impact of 21-22 accounts led to the actuary having to amend the council's 22-23 pension report, so those transactions have been transacted through the accounts. The final accounting adjustment was to correct the school's cash advance payment, which although was a net nil, we wanted to correct so that the cash and cash equivalent and the short-term creditors lines on the balance sheet were correct. There was then an adjustment to the dedicated schools grant disclosure note that was just adjusted to meet the education, skills and funding agency requirements. The final adjustment was to the annual governance statement, which was approved by this committee back in February, and so we included the latest version in the 22-23 accounts. We're asking members to note those changes at this meeting, and that's the main recommendation. As mentioned earlier, the 22-23 accounts have not yet been audited, but the next steps are dependent on any legislation changes from DLUC and National Audit Office, but a backstop date of 30th of September is expected. And we're happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Bell.
Thanks. I do understand the reasons behind the adjustments and so on. I do wonder though, are we going to be expected to look at these multiple times, I suppose, as they continue to come back to us, and obviously when the audit takes place that potentially leads to more adjustments again. I suppose I'm just wondering about the process here, and is it appropriate to just keep noting adjustments, or should we wait until we have got the final, when we do get the accounts audited, so we can look at everything all at once? I suppose I'm questioning the purpose of doing things in little stages like this.
So this is the first time we've made audit adjustments to the 22-23 accounts, but we felt they were material enough to amend and publish them on the council website. And the main reason as well, because our finance system closed at the beginning of April, so we had to make accounting transactions in the system to get the roll forward correct. So we felt it was appropriate at that time. In terms of the process, we think this is probably the one opportunity to amend the 22-23 accounts. we believe that the legislation that is likely to come in, possibly May, June time, that we'll get to know, that will dictate what Ernst & Young then do, and we think we've covered the majority of the audit adjustments and we're not expecting any further adjustments.
Thank you, that's really helpful in explaining.
James?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just seeing. So, yeah, I think to my mind they're relatively low risk adjustments, although the values are relatively high. They seem to be the sort of normal course of transactions that you'd expect post year end. I suppose the accruals item is somewhat large, but as you say, it's just a netting off of cash and creditors, and these things happen. So I think, am I right in understanding that you were referencing the backstop that was recently announced, and the cut-off means we might not get an audit of the 22-23 accounts? Is that correct?
Yeah, you're correct on that count. So the DLUC consultation has set out 3 phases, and as part of that initial phase is a backstop date for 22-23 accounts and any accounts prior to that will be signed off or given an opinion in some sort by that date. So that's what we're expecting.
And that backstop date is September 2024, is that right? Yeah,
That's correct, yes.
Could I just ask, just again, just for general understanding, I know it's not really the item as such, but the 2022-23 accounts, we showed a deficit on an accruals basis, which is kind of normal because the accounting basis and the funding basis are not the same, but there's a deficit in those 22-23 accounts, quite large. I won't quote the figure because it's a bit misleading, but then am I right in saying that then the net drawdown on the general fund in 22-23 was 23 million, and does that then get kind of topped back up again in 2023-24? So could you just confirm that understanding, maybe give a quick high-level recap of where the 22-23 accounts leave us, if is that a fair question, Chair, on this item?
I think everyone is looking towards Phil here.
I'm trying to connect up so I can actually see the accounts. It's not going to work.
Apologies for putting you on the spot with quoting specific numbers. So I was just asking in terms of, and again, it's not a really great question for this item, but just a very high level sort of where do the 22-23 accounts leave us in terms of the reserves position? Because I read in the budget for 23-24, we've got a £304 million general fund reserve as at March 2023, which looks quite healthy. But again, just really by way of recap, what's the sort of high level financial position looking like following these accounts?
Yeah, I mean, the impact of the accounts is reasonably limited because we account for that as we go through the year, and we report those to Finance Committee in terms of the budget position throughout the year, so we account for those. And the accounts wrap up all the movements between all the reserves. During the year, we generally reference the main reserves that we use to balance out the budget through the year. I think what we do show in terms of our earmarked reserves is that our earmarked reserve balance is quite high. Our general fund balance is quite low in comparison to other core cities. So we tend to look at the overall earmarked reserves position, which is relatively healthy, as you've picked out. Often people do look at the general fund reserve in isolation. The approach taken by the council to date has been to earmark reserves, but also to keep those under review. So where things are set aside for specific purposes, we do an annual review of those to make sure that we still need the reserves for those purposes and whether they can be repurposed or not.
Thank you for that answer. Any further questions? Councillor Nottage.
Quick one, thanks. If we miss the backstop and we don't get an audited set of accounts for 22-23, does that have an impact on the 23-24 accounts in terms of not having an audited starting position?
Any further questions? There are no further questions. So what we noted, what's the recommendations here? The Audit and Standards Committee is asked to note the amendments to the audited statement of accounts for 22-23. The Audit and Standards Committee is asked to note the delay to the external audit of the 22-23 statement of accounts. All approved? Thank you. We now move on to item 9, Auditor's Annual Report, and the presenting officer is Hayley on screen. So over to you, Hayley.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I'll take the report as read, but I am conscious, obviously, there have been some changes potentially in committee membership since we conducted the bulk of our audit and previous reporting. So obviously happy to take any questions. I suppose what this report does is it's ultimately the final report that we issue in relation to the 21-22 audit of the financial statements and our reporting on value for money. And alongside that, we have also issued our certificate, which essentially closes out our responsibilities in its entirety for that financial year. So the vast majority of this report is actually summarising the audit results report, which had all of the detailed findings in it that has previously come to this committee. So at a high level, we issued an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. There was nothing to note in relation to going concern. There was no exception reporting in relation to value for money, and we didn't have any need to invoke any of our other statutory powers that we have as your external auditor. We have summarised the significant risks that we identified as part of our audit and our approach to them, and any findings, which were all set out in more detail in our audit results report. But as I say, I'm happy to take questions on them should any member of the committee have any. What this report does as well, though, is it goes into a little bit more detail in relation to value for money. So we didn't identify any significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements for 21-22. What we do need to do, though, is make sure that we set out a commentary or a high-level commentary on your arrangements across the key areas of focus, and that's what we've done and set out in Appendix 1. Or Appendix A, sorry. And then Appendix B just includes a summary of the control management and also to the committee previously, and we've summarised that along with management responses. And then Appendix C summarises the fees for that financial year, although just to note that they are subject to approval by the PSAA, so they aren't finalised. And then finally in Appendix D, we've got an example of the certificate which I have signed and sent on to management. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you so much, Hayley, for that. And I think this is something that we've discussed previously, so it's just a matter of noting this report. But if there are any questions or observations, then please shout out. No? Silence is no. So we're happy to note the report. And thank you so much, Hayley. And thank you for being our external auditors. Right, we're moving on to item number 10. Introduction and audit plan, Tim Cutler and Matthew Moore. KPMG, I think.
Good evening. My name's Tim Cutler. I'm a partner at KPMG. I will be leading your external audit service for the next few years. Very good to meet you. I'm actually returning, as I was the engagement leader for Sheffield City Council several years ago, so it is good to be working with the council again. By way of personal introduction as well, I am a Northern Audit Partner. I'm based in Manchester, but I cover the north of England and Scotland. I also lead KPMG's relationship with PSAA as the body that holds all local government audit contracts, and I lead our relationship with the FRC and the NAO as far as it pertains to local audit, which, given some of the issues we may just come on to discuss shortly, and linked to Councillor Nottage's question, hopefully will be quite useful in passing that on to the council very swiftly. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm Matthew Moore. I'm the Senior Manager on the audit. I've been doing public sector work and local authority work for 25 years. So live in Hull, work out of the Leeds office. So plenty of experience, first time with Sheffield. So looking forward to meeting you all and working with you.
Okay, so there's a document we've shared with you today. That is our draft audit plan for the March 24 audit year. It's draft for two main reasons. Firstly, we're yet to complete the value for money risk assessment. We are receiving information from management and we're working well with management on both the financial statements and the value for money aspects of the work, but we're yet to conclude our risk assessments. That will come back to a later meeting within this document. The other reason that it's outstanding, and linked to your question earlier, is we're yet to see the guidance and the final legislation to implement the backstop date. So one of the things we're unable to comment on in this draft audit plan is the work that we'll be required to do on your opening balance sheet. So if we assume for a second that the legislation is passed and there is a modification or a disclaimer to that March 23 audit opinion, we'll effectively have to rebuild the assurance to you as an authority over a 3-year period. That's what the draft guidance currently says. So we'll probably bring this back to a later meeting and have a fuller discussion, but essentially there won't be a detailed opening balance sheet audit as you would recognise it in any other disclaimed situation. We'll be rebuilding that assurance period over 3 years. And that will be consistent with what other authorities in a similar situation will have as well. And I know the FRC and the NAO are intending to issue guidance to that effect for all local authorities in due course. So they're the two main gaps in the audit plan at the moment. However, we did want to bring this to you just to demonstrate the progress we're making with the finance team and the fact we have been able to progress the March 24 audit to date. And what you see there is a culmination of that work and our understanding of the authority so far. So I'll hand over to Matt to walk you through some of the significant risk areas. Hopefully the general content of the plan should be consistent with what you will have seen before. Ultimately, you know, it is the same set of accounts that EY will have audited in the past, and therefore the risk profile will look very similar. What we've tried to do is just articulate why we believe those to be significant risks and also the work we will do in response to those risks later in the year. Matt, do you want to walk through each risk?
Okay, thanks. So significant risks on page 37 of your pack. We've identified 4 significant risks and 1 other audit risk, the 4 being valuation of land and buildings, management of override of controls, valuation of pension, retirement obligations, and completeness of non-pay expenditure. And then the other area of audit risks is the ledger migration, which the council have gone through during the year. So if we touch on audit, the valuation of land and buildings first on page 38, we as an audit firm, we assess these as a significant risk due to, in reality, the majority of the balance is an estimation of the value. So clearly there is assumptions and judgments made by yourselves and your experts, which we then have to look at and make sure that we're comfortable that those assumptions and assertions are reasonable and are in line with the code. So we will use our internal valuers to support us with that judgment in the area, and we will obviously critically assess the work done by your valuers of which you've got a number of valuers that you're using for the various specific items within your balance sheet. So that's a touch on valuation of land and buildings. Management override of controls. It's a professional standards required. This is a risk that management are in a position to override any control environment that you may have. We've not found anything specific to Sheffield that adds to that standard. So it's just the basic standard override. Number 3, on the valuation of post-retirement benefit obligations, so pension liabilities is you've got a pension liability which is through South Yorkshire Pension Scheme, the local government pension scheme. So it's understanding the assumptions and assertions that the actuary has put in. Again, it's an estimation of those liabilities. So understanding what the assumptions and assertions that the actuary has put in place, and then we will use our own internal pension centre of excellence to challenge those assertions and assumptions to make sure that they are recorded as a reasonable position. And as in prior year, the pension scheme is likely to be in a surplus position, is making sure that the rules around the pension asset ceiling are followed appropriately. And then the final significant risk is the fraud risk from expenditure recognition. Auditing standards usually have an income recognition fraud risk, but Practice Note 10 and ourselves look at it's really the expenditure of an organisation like yourselves that is the fraud risk. So we will look at the completeness of your expenditure. One, because of the pressures that that organisation is under in terms of meeting their budgeted requirements, and that we see that any fraudulent activity would be to minimise the accrued expenditure. So that's our focus in there. And then the final audit risk, which is just the general ledger migration, is that clearly there's a risk of loss of data and or incorrect data being transferred across. So we're just doing a piece of work alongside your IT team to understand that migration and how that would then impact our audit should that happen. So I think that's sort of a quick run through of the summary of the risks.
Yeah, I mean, the only other 2 elements within the plan just to bring to your attention, although I'll happily answer any questions and any other comment, is we do draw your attention to the materiality we intend to use on the audit this year. That's set out in the plan, and also in the appendices, as required of any auditor, we confirm our independence and an unfettered position to deliver your opinion later this year. At that point, I'll pause and happily take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I must admit I found it quite easy to read and understand, so thank you for the way you've actually put it. Any questions and observations? Councillor Nottage?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you for making it digestible for lay people such as myself. Variations around the opening balance notwithstanding, have you got an anticipated time frame for being able to close off on the 23-24 accounts?
Well, we've certainly set a plan with finance to commence the audit on time this summer. Obviously, with any year 1 audits, there are your unknown unknowns that we will have to deal with as and when they arise. But I think the key issue is the level of work we will be required to do on the opening balance sheet. We're taking a view, and we're developing methodology at the moment, but until the guidance is issued, we will not be able to confirm exactly how much that is required. I mean, we feel both historically and the work we've done over the last few weeks, we have a good understanding of your operations. We think we understand where the higher levels of audit effort will need to be, and we're already developing with finance the working purpose that we will need in time to start the audit over the summer. So all I can say at this point is we intend to do a normal summer timetable, which I'm sure finance will be delighted by. But until we see the guidance and understand the full level of work, it's impossible to confirm that.
Thanks a lot for that, and hopefully we won't have an ironic situation where the introduction of the backstop causes a massive backlog.
Thank you for that. Any further questions, observations? James?
Thank you. Opening balances. To what extent will you be able to rely on the work of EY if opening balances have been audited by EY? It's a question for yourselves. And then, if it's possible, I can see we've still got Hayley on the call. To what extent will EY be conducting an audit of 22-23 this summer and then reporting on an except for basis, or is the expectation really that it will be a disclaimer opinion and therefore KPMG sort of starting from scratch, if you like?
Well, if I say what would normally happen in this situation, because you refer to sort of if EY were to do the audit, I mean, this is part of the issue with the backlog proposals, because auditing standards, the way they are written, it implies that an incoming order should do as much work as it possibly can to mitigate the risk around the opening balance sheet. So if you assume for a second that it is a disclaimer, that would be a lot of work. So further to Councillor Nottage's very sort of well put point, how do we avoid creating another backlog by the introduction of a backlog date with no opening balance sheet assurance? The answer is we have to use that rebuild phase over 3 years. And that way you can spread the work out over a 3-year period to rebuild your assurance to allow the sector to recover over the medium term. So that's why I say we will clearly want to do work on a risk assessment basis to make sure we do sufficient work on individual balances to know that there is unlikely to be a significant risk of misstatement in them, but we wouldn't be going as far as we would normally do in a corporate scenario where we would effectively be auditing that opening balance sheet to rebuild the assurance in 1 year. I mean, if I may, auditing standards are very much written from the point of view that it's an annual audit cycle. Obviously, in this context, what they're trying to do is rebuild assurance over 3 years. So it needs some careful interpretation of auditing standards, which audit firms will need support with, because it is an unprecedented event, and that's why the FRC are engaged in this as well. So once we receive that guidance, we'll be able to translate that into our own methodologies to deliver the work as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Thank you for that. Hayley, do you want to say anything? Or?
Yeah, sure. So I think at this stage, it's unlikely that we will be coming in and doing any procedures on 22-23, unless something significant comes out of the consultations that have been ongoing, that changes, the proposed backstop dates. Mainly because we're just not going to have sufficient time, and I don't think actually it's going to add significant value if we're not able to conclude the audit by the end of September. And given experiences previously, that's probably not going to be achievable. So the likelihood is, if nothing does change, the likelihood is that there would be a disclaimed opinion, but clearly we need to wait for that guidance to come through and then to lay the legislation to know that that's going to be the case. In terms of then offering, appropriate handover to KPMG, clearly we will do as much as we possibly can to facilitate that. Whether that is in relation to sort of handover conversations or potential reviews of the 21-22 file, and whether that's going to add any value to the process as well. But obviously, clearly, we'll do as much as we can to help with the handover.
Thank you for that, Hayley. James, does that answer your questions, or do you want to come back?
I do have one last question for KPMG. Far away. Thank you for the report. The only observation I had, and I'm somewhat loath to raise it because of the backstops and the importance of actually getting the audit done, but the overall materiality seems high end. Could you give us some assurance on the sort of 2% that you've suggested for overall materiality?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, maybe for the benefit of other members as well, if I break down what each of the figures on that slide are, so if I just get back to the slide myself, so for people looking at it, it's page 35 of the pack. So auditing standards require us to put a materiality within a range, and that range is 0.5 to 3% for an entity of this type, and on the benchmark that we use to establish that materiality. 3% would be sort of a very very low profile set of accounts. Because when you're considering materiality, what you need to look at is the level of external scrutiny on those financial statements. So whether that is levels of commercial debt and the lender interest in those accounts, whether that's the general public profile of the accounts. So KPMG's position, and I know it's consistent with one or two others, is across the local government sector, the main way that you are held to account is not the financial statements. It's done through the budgetary monitoring and performance monitoring. So that has a bearing on the level of materiality that we would apply to our audit procedures. And that's, I think you hinted at it yourself, it's about proportionate audit effort to deliver the outcome at the end of the period. However, the two other numbers on that page I think are more relevant for audit committee members, because ultimately what materiality does, it prevents us, if we find an error of that size, it prevents us signing the opinion. In our view, it becomes a true and fair issue, so we couldn't sign the opinion if there was an error that size. However, we design our procedures to a much lower level of 23.4 million. That's the margin for error effectively we're giving ourselves when we design our procedures. And then the lower figure again of 1.8 million is the level at which we would bring issues to your attention as audit committee members. So that's effectively giving you the discretion to say whether or not you believe any of those issues that we've identified are qualitatively material or significant and should require amendments. And that way, it allows us to bring to you, those charged with governance, some ability to make a decision on the adjustments of the accounts and what would hold up the audit process.
Thank you for that. Is that fine, James? Okay with that? Yeah, I've just got a few questions and a few observations, and I'm glad one of the ones that you've raised, our valuation of land and buildings, has been one of the key ones with a risk attached to it, because this has been something that's quite consistent whilst I've been on audit, that there's always contention around whether the valuations are correct or not correct. So I'm pleased to see that you've raised this as a number one issue, because it does have quite a material effect on the balance sheet if the figures are wrong. So one of the things that strikes me at the moment is that major sporting facilities will be subject to in-house valuers' desktop exercises. All other assets, I'm just majoring on what you've said there. Major sporting facilities will be subject to in-house valuers, and then on the other side, it talks about independence and bringing in independent values. The question there is, generally speaking, and I'm not sure about this authority because I don't know the makeup of the property department, something like major sporting facilities need specialist valuers to come in and do those valuations, and they're not generally done on just a desktop basis by a general practice surveyor. So that's question number one. If I can just give you all my questions and you can answer them all at once. So that was one thing that I thought was maybe something that we need to look into as something that we might be able to, because they can be of substantial value, these. And the second thing was right at the bottom paragraph on page 38 is around other land and buildings, £247 million worth of surplus assets, if you can just expand on that a little bit. I'm not expecting a complete answer because this is just an overview at this stage. And the thing that I do like, which is an observation, is you will inspect the instructions issued to the valuers for land and property, which I think is following SIPFA guidelines, and also I think it's pretty important for valuers to be given a parameter of what they're actually valuing, because you will get the answer from what the question is, and sometimes the question is wrong and then the answer is wrong. So I'm glad that you've actually raised that as an issue in there. So those are the two that I've picked up on. And finally, just for completeness, is around, and I think you've mentioned, Matthew, that there are significant risks around this, around assumptions. So that goes back to the issue of the type of instructions that we do give on this. So I'll leave it at that, and then I've got one further thing that I need to bring up.
Well, if I just respond briefly on the major sporting facilities point. So, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons we describe it within the risk column at this point. Because one of the things we were doing, particularly as year one auditors, is establishing the basis on which these valuations are carried out. So we've done a lot of risk assessments at the moment to understand, well, what type of assets do you have, what process do you go through in readiness for the year end, but it'll only be at year end itself that we actually get hold of those valuations and go through the challenge process. So, I mean, I mean, I am sort of vaguely familiar from last time around what the major sporting facilities are, and I think there is a variety of approaches that can be taken. So what we'll be doing is using our own valuation specialists to look at, well, what approach did they take? Do we feel that's the right one? And therefore, what is the quality of the valuation that's come out of it? So we're flagging it now as a risk, ready to respond to it, but we will be looking at the very point that you raised at year end, but it's just a bit premature for us to say whether or not that's an appropriate way at the moment. Because, of course, one of the things we do through this process is assess the valuers themselves. We assess management specialists to say whether they have got the relevant skills or experience to do the work that's being asked of them. And then in terms of the surplus assets, I know that was a subject of a conversation just earlier, wasn't it? So I might just hand over to Matthew or indeed Finance for that one.
Do you want to answer that one, Ruth?
If I can just come back to the major sporting facilities just for a second. At the moment, we have a debtor in our accounts for those because we don't have actually ownership of the assets themselves. We do get specialist valuation to arrive at the valuation of that debtor, that long-term debtor. And it's on a 5-year cycle, and the next specialist valuation is due in 24-25. So in the interim years, we do just an in-house desktop valuation to update that for any changes. So it is due in 24-25. Also, of course, the leisure strategy itself means that events will happen this year that will change the nature of the ownership of those assets, and that will all need to be accounted for in 24-25. Okay. And the surplus assets, I think some of that relates to, for 22-23 was the heart of the city, some of the heart of the city assets, where they, very, very close to the year end last year, required a specialist valuation because they'd been in assets under construction, but then there was an operational date just before the year end. So we, although they didn't come, they weren't leased out at that point in time, or they didn't meet the definition of becoming an operational asset. They did have a specialist commercial valuation and go into surplus assets. But again, all those categorisations will change this year as you know, as the heart of the city, you know, comes on stream. Okay.
Well, thank you for the answer. I just thought the 247 meant that we had £247 million worth of assets that we could potentially call on. But no, I agree with you, Tim, on various things that you've just said there, in particular around the valuations of specialist properties, because that is quite critical, because they tend to be the high numbers. And when you see a high number, it looks artificially high. But then the real value lies in what can you do with the site. That can be vastly different from what that figure is. And sometimes you can go away with an idea that we've got huge amounts of assets when we really haven't. The only other question I've got then is on page 41. Q3 reporting to Finance Committee is projecting a 16.7 million overspend with significant pressures on children's of 11.2, adults 2.6, neighbourhoods 2.1 and strategic support 4.5, etc., etc. How confident are we that you don't need to answer? As I say, it's just something that you've given an overview on and you'll be working on it over the next year. But that seems a fairly significant number, 16.7 million overspend at this stage. I know that it will be mitigated and probably come down as we move into it. That's why I was keen on the surplus. That might have covered it. But is my thinking correct that this will be mitigated as we move into the accounting year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll possibly defer to management if there's a budgetary point to be made here. But I think the reason we're flagging it here under the fraud risk and expenditure recognition slide is we're looking at what management's incentives are as we get towards your past year end now. So what we were looking for is what is the budgetary pressure? You know, as you've said, it is significant, as it is with most local authorities at the moment. So we would see the incentive being to understate expenditure to sort of preserve that budgetary performance. So that's why we've moved to that completeness focus on expenditure recognition. But, you know, through the value for money risk assessment we will bring to you later in the year, we'll also do more work ourselves to understand the budgetary controls and budgetary monitoring that you do.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the answers to that, and we look forward to working with you on that. So, what it remains for me to say is, if there is no further question, is to note the auditor's audit plan and strategy for the year. If all members are happy with that. Fine. Thank you very much. Finally, item 11, which is the work programme. Jay, I think there's not much we can say about this. At this stage.
I'll just say briefly, the work programme for the next municipal years can be found in your packs. The recommendation is to approve that work programme. There's some items on there which I won't mention now, but probably need to move around just to fit audit timescales and stuff, but I can work with the chair whether that may be before the next meeting. But yeah, for members to approve that as it is at the moment. So, Chair.
Thank you so much, Jay. And I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. I'd just like to thank all the officers and members that worked with me on audit. It's been an interesting year for us. And thank you for officers for putting up with the questions that we've been putting to you, because next year might be a very different committee. I don't know who it might be. So thank you so much. And that brings this committee to an end. Thank you for your attendance.